Okay. All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our Homegrown Renewables Woody Biomass Power Hour. I'm Lindsay Hardy. I use she and her pronouns, and I work here at the Environmental Center. I'm the program director of our energy and waste programs, and then I'm joined here today by Neil, who wears many hats, one of them being technology, but also being my counterpart on the energy program. Oh, thanks, Neil. All right, so just a really quick introduction to who the Environmental Center is, in case some folks are new here today. We are a hub of sustainability here in Central Oregon. We work primarily in Deschutes County, but also some in Perk and Jefferson counties as well. And our mission is to embed sustainability into daily life in Central Oregon. And that sounds pretty broad because it is, because there are a lot of things you can do to impact that work and impact how we live, work, and play here in Central Oregon. And so we do that through a variety of ways, through connecting with individuals, students, educators, elected officials, you name it. We're trying to work at all levels of change here in Central Oregon. Can I do it with this one, Neil? You should be able to. Okay. Oh, yeah. All right. Like I said, we work in schools with adults on events like this, hopefully getting to connect people with good information to ignite some really exciting conversations. And one of the newer areas that we're working in around advancing change with local and statewide policy. And it's part of the reason that we're here tonight, because we want to start to have a conversation about what renewable energy goals can look like in our community and how we can encourage local elected officials and others to take action and move some of those goals forward.
It's just a big difference.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right, and so events like the event tonight really help to spark that conversation. So we're really excited to have folks here who are interested in these topics, because one of the most important things we can do is start to get educated and learn more about these so that we can have a more robust dialogue about all of these issues as we move forward. All right, so if you want to get engaged in any other ways, I encourage you to connect with Neil or I after. There's lots of other ways that you can work with us, including volunteering or just attending more events, and we can help connect you with information to do more of that as well. All right, and so some of the other events that we have coming up in this lineup, the next in early June, will be a more in-depth deep dive on the green tariff with some experts from around the state who helped to develop the policy and who are helping to develop more renewable energy projects that could potentially be included in that program. We'll go over really briefly what that is tonight and then take the deep dive with them. And then we'll also have a similar event to this one, looking at micro hydro opportunities or in conduit, working with the irrigation districts and looking at all the different ways that we're producing renewable energy already here in Deschutes County. And then we have a lot of other upcoming events with our other programs as well, including getting to volunteer in the garden if you're interested, or learning more about composting. All right, so I think that is, yep, that is my last slide, our quick introduction. I'm going to switch over and do a high-level overview of the green tariff here. I have way too many screens going on this little screen here. There we go. Okay. All right, so I just wanted to do a really brief overview. It's hard to go very deep into this topic without it bringing up a lot more questions. And I hope I can start to answer some of the basic questions for you all tonight. And then I encourage you to save the really hard ones for the next group of speakers that we're going to have that can dig into this policy some more. But just some context for what's happening in Central Oregon right now. The city of Bend has set a goal to achieve 100% renewable energy through their climate action plan by 2025. And then the Environmental Center is working with some community members to lead a community-driven effort to encourage Deschutes County to also develop an energy plan and prioritize projects that could be happening here locally as well. So this conversation is really timely with the goals that are happening and goals that we're trying to achieve, because the green tariff is one way that can help us get there and meet some of those goals. So I wasn't sure if there are any other communities or folks who are attending either in person or online who are working towards any other renewable energy goals. And I'll let folks share that in the chat if they are. So the goal that's laid out in the City of Bend's Climate Action Plan is to develop a roadmap to get to 100% renewable. When this goal was developed, the green tariff, we didn't even know it was an option yet. So there was a coalition of communities working with utilities to try to figure out how to make that happen. But now there's actually a tool and a mechanism to actually drive this forward. And the goal or the target for the city of Bend is to get to 100% renewable by 2025. So we are coming up really quickly on that deadline. So the green tariff is a really great tool to help actually meet some of these goals. And it gives us a way to actually work with the utilities and file to have a rate structure that's built into utility bills to actually purchase renewable energy. The green tariff was created in this last legislative session through House Bill 2021. It was also known as the 100% Clean Energy for All bill. And the biggest component of that bill was requiring utilities to acquire 100% emissions-free electricity by 2040 and 80% by 2030. But one of the hidden gems among many other pieces that was really great about this bill is that it created this green tariff. So allowing communities to work with the utility to pay for a special rate structure to purchase renewable energy. And so now that we have this mechanism to actually drive some of these conversations forward, and we know that it can actually work, because before it was a little bit ambiguous, right? We're going to get to 100% renewable, but we're not exactly sure how we can do that and work with the utilities to do it. Now we just have to figure out how to make it work for our community and how to make it work for our goals and what define what we want success to actually look like for our community. And so some of the other pieces that'll be coming up in conversations with folks is actually defining what our goals are for our community. And that's what's really neat about these programs, because the community can actually start to look at how they want to develop a program and how they want to customize it for themselves, including who leads the effort, which government entity. Hopefully we're in a situation where there's a lot of folks who are engaging between the county and the city of Bend. And that'll be a decision that we have to make of how those programs are actually run. But some of the other questions that we'll have to answer in order to actually develop the program with the utility are, what are our specific targets? Do we want to be able to purchase renewable energy that's developed by a solar installation in Utah, or do we want that to be a locally sourced generation? And how much do we want to be local versus outsourced from other places? And we'll be able to actually look at what are the community benefits that we want to be able to bring to Central Oregon with these types of projects. So I think where this conversation tonight comes in is actually looking at, well, we have this potential project that is producing renewable energy here in Central Oregon. What are some of the other community benefits, and how could that actually start to play into a green tariff program and help us meet some of those goals that are laid out for achieving renewable energy. So I think I will pass it off now to Eric, and we'll hold some questions until the end, unless anybody has a clarifying question right now on the green tariff. And then we'll let Eric tell us about the project that's happening in Prineville, and we'll dig into some more information about biomass with our other presenters. And as you're listening to these presentations, you can be thinking about, well, how does this energy source then fit into the mix here in Bend? Is this something that we want to prioritize as we put together a plan? Do we want to acquire local energy? Do we want it to be biomass? Do we want it to be solar? This is really just building that foundation so we can have a conversation about what does it mean to have local energy. All right, so I'm going to pass it off to Eric Klon for the city of Prineville.
So Lindsay, how many people do we have online? Do we know?
10.
Okay, because we could just like go get a beer and talk about this. There's not too many people here. So I feel kind of weird presenting into a small group, but I'll give it a shot. Yeah, so Eric Klon, city engineer with the city of Prineville. We have a fun project we want to talk about. Lindsay really just kind of slipped in what the issue is. So right now, the city of Bend has this opportunity in front of them to go 100% renewable. And how do they do that? You know, solar in Utah is cheap, but what I want to communicate is just some of the ancillary benefits that a project like this has that maybe solar wind in Utah doesn't have. So when I say, you know, here's this ancillary benefit, does solar in Utah say that, do that? You guys say no, and we'll just go back and forth. So we're working on a small, relatively small biomass plant. So 24.9 megawatts. Like how much power is that? You know, that would be enough power for probably 30,000 people. So Bend's quite a bit more than that, but about 30,000 people. It's renewable power, but it's baseload power. So what does baseload mean? That means it's on all the time. That means we can ramp it up if we need to. It means it can ramp it down. I like solar, but solar is only on when it's on. And at the end of the day, Pacific Power's power is still over 50% coal. Don't realize that. And so it's great that we're generating solar power, but when the sun's down, we're burning coal to provide that power to your home or your community. A lot of benefits that we'll talk about, both environmental and economic. And at the end of the day, there's going to be some ancillary heat that we generate. So what could we do with that ancillary heat? We could do a small diameter sawmill. So sawmills got a bad rap, but man, wood is a really good way to sequester carbon. And as we look at mass timber opportunities, I know the new OSU building here in Bend is mass timber, and I think that's like 5 stories. So that's just a wonderful way to sequester carbon. We're also looking at maybe some hydroponic food production or the manufacture of biochar. So what is biochar? That's just a material that you heat up, it sequesters carbon, it lasts a long time. And it's a wonderful soil amendment. So if you mix that into your soil, it allows sandy soils to hold more moisture, which is something we should probably be thinking about. And our goal is that this is just a pilot project that we can replicate in other areas. So it's the city of Prineville and Cook County. We've come together to work on this project. TRM Energy Solutions is a group we're working with to help us develop the material streams, and then Wetlands. So I'm from the sawmill industry. Steve Forrester, our city manager, is from the sawmill industry. And then Steve Uppelman is one of our council members. But Wetlands provides probably 90% of the dry kilns throughout the world. So a dry kiln is you have a sawmill, you have to heat that material up to set the pitch. But they also have about 350 of these power plants throughout the world. So they're burning either sawdust out of the sawmill, maybe sugarcane residuals to generate power. City of Prineville, we've really done a lot of great things over the last 14, 15 years. We've kind of do them quietly and under the radar. So who's been to the wetland complex, the Crooked River Wetlands complex? It's the most beautiful wastewater treatment plant in Oregon. that's a great project. I was actually, last time I was here, it was to present an award to the Audubon Society for their support. But we were tasked in 2005 to build a $60 million wastewater treatment plant. You know, our population hadn't even hit 10,000 at the time, and it was just devastating. So over the course of probably 8 years, we worked with DEQ and EPA on just this alternative wastewater treatment process. We're not going to build a big mechanical treatment plant. We're going to build a wetland and let the wetland treat our wastewater. It was tough. We battled probably DEQ for 4 years. They got on board, and at the last minute, EPA said they didn't want it. EPA is all about a big mechanical treatment plant with a pipe going directly into a river. That's what they understand. The governor got involved. We were able to push that through. And the year after that, we received EPA's Pisces Award. So that's the top 5 environmental projects in the nation. It's a big deal. And most importantly, we did it in a way that's repeatable. So what's Redmond doing right now? We have the Crooked River Wetlands Complex. They're building the Redmonds Wetlands Complex. The City of Sisters will be going in this direction. And I think you'll see that all throughout Oregon. And that was our goal, right? I think we were on the bleeding edge, not the cutting edge of that project, but we did it in such a way that was easily repeatable. We're currently implementing an aquifer storage and recovery project. So we take water during the winter when stream flows are high, we store it in a confined aquifer, and then we pull that water out in the summer when we need it. So I can safely say we are the only city in Central Oregon who has rising groundwater tables right now. Everyone else is declining. We're actually gaining on our groundwater tables. You know, you don't hear about this because we just try to keep it quiet and fly underneath the radar, but we're pretty proud of it. Both Steve and I have a background in the forest products industry. So we're both born and raised in Prineville. My dad was a sales administrator for the Forest Service. You know, that's what he did. I went to school, got a degree in mechanical engineering, really wanted to come back. So Steve, same deal, got a degree in forest management and business. He came back, he hired me right out of college. We ran a large remanufacturing plant, and a long series of bad decisions ended us up at the city. But we have that, yeah, the dark side of the equilibrium. But we ended up still having that passion and just that proactive approach to forest health. We got to do something. So what are biomass concerns? And there's plenty of biomass concerns. This small group, you guys stop me if you want to talk about any of these. And a lot of them are justifiable. So deforestation, you know, Europe said that biomass was a renewable energy source. And what happened? We started clear cutting North Carolina, creating pellets and sending it over to Europe. You know, that was a bad deal. But that's not what we're about. We are really about creating a market for low value material. So right now, just in Crook County, over the last probably 5 years, we spent $10 million. So that's OWEB and RCS going after juniper. We want to create a market for that so that the local economy can deal with that juniper issue. Biomass, a lot of concerns are harmful emissions. A lot of people don't want to burn anything to generate power. About 30% of our total project cost is just going into the emissions controls. And this stuff is just so clean. We'll talk about that more, but as compared to open burning, and that's what we're doing right now. We're just open burning, and it makes Bend and Central Oregon pretty horrible. You know, we're not going to go to plantations. And one thing that the city of Prineville has is we have our own railroad. So we connect to the UP and the BN in Redmond. And so what that allows us to do is more efficiently bring in woody biomass. So some of the benefits we'll talk about, a lot of forest health, wildfire improvements that this project would bring. Does solar in Utah do that? No. Air quality improvements, water quality, water is a big thing. We gotta start looking at water in Central Oregon or we're gonna be in trouble. Increased carbon sequestration, reduce landfill waste. About 70% of the material is wood that would be going to a landfill. We can pull that back. Baseload generation, I mentioned that. Job creation, you know, we in Crook County, we have these massive solar farms. Once they're built, there's nothing there. This project would support 100 job people just going out into the forest doing forest health projects. And then environmental justice, I want to chat about that for a little bit. So the issue with biomass has always been fuel stability. And so this project that we're looking at is $145 million. You're never going to want to build that based upon wood coming off of the forest, right? Because there's going to be a lawsuit, there's going to be some issue that stops that. And so what we've been able to do is develop a 20-year supply of private wood. So that private wood is guaranteeable, it's bondable. If a truck doesn't show up, we call in a $3 million bond on them. You know, this is serious stuff. And that's something that Steve and I had never been able to do. We've been looking at this for 20 years. Also, our goal is not to secure the cheapest material. We want to team with a partner that's interested in the ancillary benefits of this. And then having that railroad and the opportunity to backfill or backhaul really reduces our diesel impact. So our wood, where's our wood going to come from? Where do we have these private wood contracts? So as I mentioned, 60% of it's urban wood waste. So that's material that would be going to a landfill in Portland or a landfill in Salem. With our railroad, we can reach out there and grab that. So what happens? It's not releasing methane. If we can burn it in a controlled environment, it's not filling up landfill. There's a lot of benefits to it. About 30% of it is forest-derived fuels. So that's from private forests. And then 10% agricultural waste. The thing that we have in these private wood contracts is we have levers so that as a forest health project becomes available, as a juniper thinning project becomes available, we can slow that private wood down to take that federal or state wood in. But if there's an issue, we can ramp them back up to keep the plant running. And that's what we're hoping to do, is eventually just get to juniper forest treatment residuals, right? We're spending so much money to treat the forest. Let's create a market so that we're not sending money out there. That money is actually coming back. And then forest products, manufacturing residuals, so the sawdust, things like that. But importantly, you know, we're not logging. This is not a reason to go out and log. We're trying to improve the environment, improve our forests.
The forest treatment residuals, is that on the public forest lands or is that on private lands?
So it'll start off on private lands, but as any federal wood becomes available, we'll gladly take that. So right now, you know, we're
like the stewardship contract.
Yeah, stewardship contract.
I mean, it seems like spending a lot of time out in our forest west here.
There is, right? And that's the issue. Right now, we're throwing money at that solution. So we pay people to go out to cut it and burn it out there. Our thought is we create a market for it. So as society, we're not throwing money out there, we're paying them to bring that in. And
so that could be accessed, that material could be accessed even though it's on public lands.
it could be. It's just.
So the conflict with public lands would be logging trees, not taking this.
But still, you could have somebody that, you know, for the cost of a stamp, you can stop a timber health project or whatever. So our hope is to educate, show people that we're not going out there and logging, you know, and what would we rather do? Would we rather pay somebody to go burn wood in the forest, or would we rather, you know,
right,
bring that material in? If we were taking all of our material from the forest, we could treat about 3¼ acres per hour with that. That's significant because these little forest health projects that are going on in the forest, you know, we're talking 200 acres, 300 acres, and we're doing those once a year. And The Deschutes National Forest, the Ochoco National Forest is a lot more than that. You know, just little Ochoco National Forest is 600,000 acres. Deschutes is probably million, you know, over 1 million anyways. And so you're not going to get the Deschutes National Forest healthy doing 200 acres at a time. Once again, that low diameter or small diameter, low value species, you know, the juniper, the thinning residuals, that's what we want to create a market for. And as this quote shows on the bottom, you know, the Forest Service gets it, the Department of State Lands gets it. It's just we need to educate the public. We're gonna improve air quality. The air quality has just been horrible as of late. As we work with the city of Bend, August used to be a great month for tourism. You're actually seeing that decline just because of the smoke. So as I mentioned previously, over $30 million is going into air scrubbing technology, and we can remove over 99% of the PM 2.5. So that's that nasty, the little pieces of the smoke, we can get rid of it. And what do? We have these electrostatic scrubbers that just pulls everything out of the smoke. We don't have an exhaust stack, you have a heat release stack. You don't see any smoke coming from this. And for those of us that live here, we just realize how those air quality issues are getting worse and worse and worse. Historically, DEQ's air quality monitor went up to 500. And I know in Cook County, I think we hit like 750. In the valley, they hit 1100. And this is just a good option. Rather than burning that stuff out in the forest, let's burn it in a controlled environment. Probably the biggest ancillary benefit that I think we should in Central Oregon consider is water. So the Keystone Ranch, have you sold that a time or two? Have you sold that ranch a time or two?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. Yeah. So the Keystone Ranch is just probably 15 miles east of Prineville. It's on the right, that beautiful meadow. But you can see what juniper is doing. And this is just really since the pre-European times to now and us stopping fires. So that picture, the upper picture is in the 1890s. We start controlling fire. You get to the picture in 1989. So Oregon State has done some wonderful studies in Central Oregon. They've treated a basin for juniper. They've left a parallel basin not treated, and it's real and measurable. You can see how much juniper you use in water. Your springs start to flow. I'll get to this in the future, but an acre of juniper will consume 100,000 gallons of water a year. A single juniper will consume in Crook County 5,000 gallons of water a year. You know, people don't understand numbers, but the average home in Central Oregon uses about 100,000 gallons of water in a year. So you have a residential home where you have 20 junipers. That's equivalent. And then you start to drive and look at these junipers. It's astonishing. Juniper has increased over 10-fold in Central Oregon since the 1880s. And as I mentioned, yeah, 1 acre will consume 100,000 gallons, or really all of the available water. So everybody knows where Prineville Reservoir is, Bowman Dam. The Bureau of Reclamation put a stream gauge on the Crooked River back in 1942. And what they were looking at is the total outflow of the Crooked River, because they were deciding if they wanted to build a dam there, they built Prineville Reservoir. And so going back to 1942, you can see that the Crooked River is a really flashy system. You know, our wettest year, we had almost 700,000 acre feet come out. Our driest year, we had 39,000 acre feet. But you can see as I try to fit a trend line to that, it's decreasing. And that's kind of garbage data there, or it's really busy. And so what I did here is I just took a 10-year average to try to smooth that data out. And what do you see? You see the 20-year climate cycles. We have a 20-year climate cycle in Central Oregon. but you can see it's decreasing, and it's decreasing 25 to 30%. You know, why is that? I'm going to make the argument here that it's just completely related to the juniper in the upper country. So is it climate change? You know, everything I'm seeing for climate change in Crook County is warmer, but a little bit wetter. That's still bad for us because we need the moisture as snow. Whereas at additional irrigation, there's really no additional irrigation up there. This is total precipitation in that basin over the same period. So it's flashy. If we smooth that around, you can see the climate cycles, but we're still getting the same amount of moisture. So that's juniper. It's junipers. I think this is the 5th time I tell you they'll consume 100,000 gallons per acre. So that's one thing you gotta remember. Just in Crook County, we have over 2 million acres of juniper now that we never had. I don't hate juniper. I like the old gnarly junipers that live up in the rocks and are protected from fire, but these massive explosions are just not working for our watershed. And once again, we're throwing a bunch of money out there to try to solve that problem. Let's let capitalism take care of it, create a market for it, get people out there working. Another thing that we're going to do is develop baseload power. So we mentioned power coming out of baseload local power coming out of Utah. This power is in Central Oregon, and that could be quite beneficial. So in the event of a big ice storm or something that takes down our transmission lines, this is a pretty good sized chunk of power in Central Oregon that could take care of our hospitals. Redmond Fairgrounds is supposed to be the epicenter for when we have the Cascadia event. We could light them up, juice them up, which would be good. And yeah, just a wonderful opportunity to increase our community resiliency. And that's the community of Central Oregon. Then environmental justice. So probably most of us have air conditioning systems in our homes or filters, but we're not thinking about our disadvantaged populations. Typically those low income, those disadvantaged populations, you know, they don't have a lot of money. They can't go to the coast to get out of the smoke like maybe some of us do. They're not going to have the filters in their homes. You know, they're not going to have the air conditioning. They're going to have their windows open when it's smoky just because it's so hot. Disproportionately in Central Oregon, they work outside. Disproportionately, those populations have health issues that are exacerbated by smoke. And they often can't pay for the things some of us can, the fire hardening around their homes. You know, you think about Lapine area, there's some scary areas where it's just so dense that a fire is really going to roll through there. And this project does that. Solar in Utah doesn't do that. So the project will have 15 people operating the facility, but more importantly, we'll create 100 jobs. Those are people just going out into the forest, going out onto the grasslands to get juniper. 200 jobs over the course of construction. What our hope is that just like the wetland project, we're fighting the battle, we're slugging through it, we get this up and running, and then other communities can do it for 10% of the effort that we're expanding and just revitalize that forest products industry. So where are we at? We have an engineering design study complete. We have an environmental and economic third-party analysis underway. We have some big funders that are interested in the project. They wanted some third-party analysis done. I don't know if they just didn't trust me, but we're working through that. And then we're working into this launch phase where we're just going to get this project up and going. So that means going back to DC, working with our legislators, working with the Forest Service, and getting it up and running. So great support, letters of support from the governor, from our senators, from all of the supervisors related to managing that resource. And that's it. I really like this quote. We need to innovate, right? We need to increase our risk tolerance. There's no perfect solutions, and this is not a perfect solution, but the time's come start taking some risk. We got to do something with climate change. We got to do something with the wildfire and other critical issues. And I feel like maybe this is us working with the data centers, like they're just waiting for this perfect ship to come by that's going to solve all of the climate change issues. And it's not going to happen. This isn't the perfect solution, but we got to get something going. So a little bit late, but any questions or comments?
Yeah, if there are any clarifying questions, and then we'll do.
I'll wait until the end.
But if anybody has a clarifying question, definitely that, and we'll switch over to the next.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so Josh, feel free to share your screen now, and you are up next. You're good to go.
Okay.
Wanted to share yours, right? Perfect. All right.
All right. Yeah. Hi, good evening to everyone. Thanks for inviting me to participate in this panel. And I'll run through this pretty quickly just to share with you how Energy Trust of Oregon and our renewables program can help support development and installation of this type of biomass renewable energy system. But you can always feel free to reach out to me outside of this event to talk more about your potential project you might be looking into. Here's a little information about Energy Trust in general. A lot of you are probably pretty familiar with this, but you know, we're tasked with administering the public purpose charge from investor-owned utilities in the state, and more specifically, our renewables program funding comes from the investor-owned electric utilities. So we are limited to funding projects for electricity generation within PGE or Pacific Power territory. So a little more specifically about our renewables technologies that we can support: municipal owned community scale wind between 1 and 20 megawatts. We support geothermal, hydropower. Our focus tends to be in the irrigation modernization and municipal water delivery system space these days. And then for biopower, we support both biogas and woody biomass projects. And then, of course, commercial and residential solar. A little bit more about our incentive eligibility. We need to support projects that are for renewable electricity generation less than 20 megawatts that are going to either deliver to Pacific Power or PGE or net meter within their service territory to make sure those public purpose charge funds will benefit the ratepayers of those utilities. And for technologies, I already covered that briefly. But yes, biomass is certainly something that we support. And then a little bit newer of an update is that we are now able to support projects for reliability, resilience, and integration of renewable energy resources into the distribution system. That's a result of the recently passed House Bill 3141. So we have two main types of incentives: project development assistance and then installation incentives. So we offer project development assistance funding to help develop some of these projects and just reduce some of the hurdles that exist for developing these renewable energy projects. So any type of development work, grant writing, feasibility studies, design, all that, non-capital development work. We can support with a 50% cost share. And that's up to $200,000 cumulative total per project. That's available on an ongoing basis. So if you ever have a renewable project you think you'd like to develop or have interest in, you can always contact us and see about accessing that project development assistance funding. For the installation incentive side, we try to help reduce that installation cost and basically try to bring it closer to on par with the what you would expect to pay if you were just buying from the utility. And that's what we call the above market costs. There's a longer answer about what exactly that is, which I'm not going to get into right now, but it's basically just trying to make it more comparable to the cost of buying from the utility. So yeah, for requests greater than 150,000, there might be subject to a competitive process. That just depends on the volume and our budget at the time. But below 150,000, those are available on an ongoing basis. And above 150,000, you can talk to us about getting an application for that. We haven't had to resort to the competitive process for a while, just due to a low volume of applications and adequate funding. But we release a open solicitation for those projects twice a year. Keep your eye out for that. And then something new, this is still under development, so there's not a whole lot to share about specifics, but something we're developing right now is we're kind of assessing how we can support communities that are starting to navigate this project with the green tariff. So the customer supported renewables, planning assistance of some type, where we would like to help government entities to help them navigate that process. However, it's going to end up looking, none of this is super clear yet. So like I said, it's not totally clear exactly how this offer is going to look, but we just want to get the word out that we're planning to offer this support for communities to help with some type of professional services support or coordination support to help with that green tariff process. Couple quick examples of projects we've worked with and supported. There was Wallowa Resources did an integrated biomass energy campus, and as part of that, they had a small biomass system that this was a gasifier boiler that was paired with a couple small organic Rankine cycle generators. We provided both project development and installation incentive for that. With the city of Prineville, we've helped fund a study for a biomass combined heat and power sort of district system. And then in 2020, and then we were able to help support the Prineville Renewable Energy project you just heard about. And then there's currently another project we're helping provide project development assistance for. It's a smaller type of system that will use gasifier also, and use that technology to take those what was a waste stream and use it as a feedstock for a biomass energy system. Just some trends that we see kind of with this type of work is, and this is a little more general for renewable energy, but definitely for the biomass, there's a specific benefit, which is the thermal energy. And so projects that can use that thermal energy in addition to the electrical energy, you can see an additional sort of financial benefit for the project. And then, like I mentioned, projects that can turn a waste stream into a feedstock, reducing their disposal costs, and then also potentially bringing something on the revenue side. For the community projects, as you see, with the type of project that Eric just introduced to us, it's the larger economy of scale can provide bigger benefits to the community. But we have, like I just mentioned, we had noticed some interest in the smaller scale systems recently for those types of businesses that create a biomass as a waste stream that could be potentially used as a feedstock. So I'll wrap it up there. Sorry, I went a little long as well, but thanks for inviting me, and contact me anytime if you want to talk about how we can help support your renewable energy project development. Thanks.
All right, Lindsay, you want me to go ahead and throw this up?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Just get this into presentation mode here. Hang on just a second. Oh, we had this earlier. Is this showing in presentation mode for you all right now? Or are you seeing are you seeing my full screen?
Green. Yep.
Yeah, we see your presentation mode, so we can see your like notes and next slides.
Man, I had it earlier. I don't know what changed this time all of a sudden. Hang on.
Never fails.
We'll all watch it. That'll help.
It's just the way of the universe.
We all look.
Oh, fine. You know what? We'll just go through it. You'll be able to watch me while I do it. So
Yeah,
good.
if you want to get started, I'll get it up on my end and I can switch it over, but go ahead and get started with what
Sure,
we have.
that's, yeah, I don't know why it's different now anyway, but anyway, we'll get going on this. Hi, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and join you all tonight, and great presentations before this. Thank you, and really good to see Eric walk through their project here. My name is Dylan Cruz. I'm the Vice President at Sustainable Northwest. Sustainable Northwest is a conservation organization. Here we go. Let's see if this goes. There we go. Sustainable Northwest is a nonprofit conservation organization. Okay, pulling up here. We're located in, you want to see my notes, I love it. We're a regional organization. We're located in Portland, Oregon, but we work across the Pacific Northwest. And so we are an environmental nonprofit, but we're definitely a unique one in that we have a focus on really working primarily in and with rural communities across the region to help deal with and solve difficult natural resource challenges. So we do work related to forestry, renewable energy development, and energy efficiency, water management, green building, and then regenerative ranching. And then in all that we do, we have a unique focus on that triple bottom line approach to make sure that it's not just about conservation gains, but the economic opportunity and social benefits as well. So kind of the approach that we bring to this work, and why you see an environmental nonprofit presenting on biomass tonight, and why we're supportive of this work. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you so much for advancing these. I really appreciate it. So you saw some of this in Eric's presentation here, but I think it's helpful to recap specifically, what is woody biomass? And in this case, we are talking a lot about what Eric presented on earlier. Primarily, it's materials from trees and woody plants that are the byproducts of forest restoration, logging residues and management, hazardous fuels reduction, as well as the byproducts from sawmill infrastructure. So wood manufacturing industries, that sawdust, those planer shavings, that low value material that's not otherwise going into a built product or pulp paper. In some cases, you can have dedicated wood energy crops, although that's not generally the case that we see in the Pacific Northwest. It can be untreated construction debris, as well as urban wood waste from tree removals and pruning. This is something that people don't always think a lot about, but increasingly as we are seeing new construction and demo and debris, a lot of times right now with landfills, they're increasingly wanting to keep wood out of landfills and raising the costs associated with landfilling. So people don't always necessarily think about that as a feedstock, but it's actually a growing feedstock for a lot of biomass facilities as we're seeing that shifting with landfill. But far and away, the predominant source for woody biomass is coming from that work related to forest management activities, both restoration as well as wood products production. Next slide, please. So the benefits of biomass. Again, Eric hit on this nice, what we think about this and why we think about considering biomass as a good option as an energy source and for utilization. It is renewable. Trees continue to grow, where this is the byproducts of this work, and then additional carbon is sequestered associated with new forest growth. Biomass is recognized under the state's clean energy law and renewable portfolio standard as a renewable energy source. So it is recognized as such in the state of Oregon. It's baseload power, as Eric mentioned. It's unique in that it has diverse outputs and distribution. So it's not just about electricity. It's also suitable for heat, for thermal purposes to heat buildings and provide space heat, as well as for liquid fuels in some cases. It can save money in terms of offsetting fossil fuels. So as we've seen spikes in propane costs and especially heating oil costs, especially out on the East Coast and in other parts of the country, biomass heating options is a really nice alternative to those expensive fossil fuels. Certainly, it's supplementing and supporting forest restoration activities and finding a way to dispose of that waste, those residuals, in a manner other than pile burning and putting all that smoke up in the air. And then it creates direct and indirect jobs in the creation and the maintenance and management of these facilities. Next slide, please. So I also like to kind of take a look at woody biomass in Oregon, and we talk about this work, and people are sometimes saying, I haven't seen this before. I'm nervous about this. Is this safe? Is it reliable? Oregon actually has a really significant amount of biomass facilities that are currently operating right now that are either idle or are in operation. We're probably top 5 in the country, actually, when it comes to the amount of biomass power production capacity that we actually have. So there's 17 power facilities that exist in the state of Oregon between 1.5 and 52 megawatts in size. Again, not all currently operational, but they're out there and that capacity exists. There's 21 thermal facilities across the state, primarily in these rural areas that aren't served by natural gas. So those are schools, they're hospitals, they're public buildings that are heating their facilities with wood pellets, with wood chips. A lot of you might be familiar with the sister school, which uses a biomass pellet boiler to heat its school over there. So there's a local option, an example. There's 7 pellet production facilities across the state that are producing wood pellets that are used locally and regionally. And then there's bioenergy production used in lumber for the heat treating and the drying of our lumber. So that's really built into our manufacturing processes. There's also integrated wood products manufacturing facilities that are doing things other than just producing biomass energy, producing firewood, post and pole, shavings, densified fuel products. So biomass isn't just about energy. It's also about utilizing it for the highest and best value. And I'll talk about that more in my next slide, but you can really see that there's actually quite a bit of biomass capacity and a long history with this technology and these sources in our state. Next slide, please. So let's talk about S&W and biomass. And again, our organization as a conservation nonprofit and why we are supportive of biomass. Now, it's not in all cases by any means. There's definitely caveats for what we're looking for. But in general, I'll say that our organization supports biomass utilization in a few areas. One, when it's scientifically sound, and especially ecologically driven. So for us, we are looking at the resource and we're thinking about biomass as a way to complement and to use that resource sustainably. So if there is fuels reduction activities and forest management that is justified and it is being driven by the ecological need, biomass can make sense. A big part of that is whether or not it's appropriately scaled. And that's a big deal in terms of the size of the facility that we're talking about here. You don't want to put a facility in place that's going to be placing demand or pressure on additional harvesting or unsustainable forest management to feed it. So it's really, really critical that we're building facilities that are appropriately scaled for the resource. Clean and efficient is a big part of it for us as well. Are you using good pollution control technologies? And are you providing local benefit to the community as well, right? So it's not just about providing power and sources. We want to make sure that we're doing it in the highest and best use, that it's efficient, and then it's providing jobs, meeting local energy needs, and then providing these good co-benefits. So Sustainable Northwest, as it relates to biomass, we provide a number of services working with communities. We provide facilitation, scientific and technical assistance as it relates to putting together both forest management prescriptions, but also helping to design these projects. We do a lot of work on advocacy at the state and the federal level related to government affairs, seeking funding for this work, supportive policies and incentives for biomass utilization. Some of you might also be familiar with our work with the Making Energy Work Coalition. That is a coalition that's managed by our energy program manager, Bridget Callahan, and her team. And it is a consortium of rural organizations and nonprofits, businesses, farmers, municipalities, including the Environmental Center, that are working to remove barriers to community-scaled energy development, renewable energy, and energy efficiency across the state, and to develop supportive policies for that work. And so in a lot of these rural areas, biomass is a piece of that and something that we're looking at. And then certainly funding and advocating and trying to secure funding for this work in terms of designing, feasibility, pre-feasibility, and then where we can, advocate for financing projects. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more on the context, and I talked about our support for this work. Context matters, and it's critical for this. Again, what are the outcomes that we're pursuing, and what are those co-benefits? What's the rationale and what's driving this work? And if we are really thinking about this idea of trying to enhance and support forest restoration and achieve these broad benefits in terms of improved forest health, wildfire risk reduction, improved drought resilience, water quantity and quality, habitat, cleaner air, economic opportunity. We're looking for all of those facets in a good biomass project. And Eric did a nice job again on how he hit on those pieces with the prep proposal that they've put together. And it really checks all of those boxes, that it's not just about, we want to build a biomass energy facility. It's, we want to accomplish all this good environmental work in our community and meet our renewable energy goals in Central Oregon. And so those co-benefits really help put certain projects over the top and justify their installation. I mentioned highest and best use. Biomass energy is not always the best use for wood products. We want to make sure that we are looking at the best economic opportunity and the existing markets for wood products to make sure that we're getting the most bang for the buck. So people ask us about this. Are we going to be going out and clear cutting forests? Are we going to be going out and putting big saw logs into these facilities? No. Those products are going to be going to sawmills. If you can get post and pole out of this product, we want to produce that. If you can get firewood out of this product, we're going to go there. You have paper chips and pulp mills. So the economics drive where that material is going to go, and the market really dictates that. But we are focused on highest and best use so that we're not creating perverse incentives to facilitate and support a biomass energy facility. So some of that's market driven, but it's also making sure that we have those sideboards in place for a project. Scale is huge. I mentioned appropriately scaled based on the available resource. We don't want to have to go out and try to find the feedstock for these facilities. We want to make sure that we've got a good, reliable, sustainable supply that's scientifically sound and ecologically justified. Source is a big part of this. Where is it coming from? Is it the byproduct of restoration? Stewardship contracts. We talked about that work in Central Oregon there. Juniper residuals are a great example of that. Material that's going to be removed to achieve restoration objectives is really critical in what we're looking for in a good project. Alternative fate is part of that. And we always ask the question, what would have happened to this material if it wasn't going into a biomass facility? And that's really important when we talk about the environmental benefits and we talk about things like carbon and CO2, because people worry with biomass, I'm putting a lot of smoke in the air, I'm putting a lot of carbon into the air. Is this actually something renewable? Is it going to meet our climate goals? Well, the question we ask is, what would have happened to that material if it wasn't going into this facility? And if the answer is it would have been burned in open piles or it would have been landfilled, we think it makes a lot of sense to direct that material to clean, renewable energy in the case of biomass production for power or for heat. And we can do so in a way that also has additional pollution controls to make sure that it's cleaner burning. So I think, that alternative fate is a critical consideration. And then again, we're always thinking about integration and innovation. Can you co-locate businesses there? Can you also think about adding additional jobs and other uses for the heat and the power produced from these facilities? Next slide. So just looking ahead, I think some trends that we're talking about and thinking about here, energy independence used to be a big driver for this work, and it still is. It's still an important consideration when we're thinking about cost savings. But increasingly, when we look at biomass in Oregon and across the West, forest health and wildfire trends are a new emphasis. As we are making a significant infusion in funding for forest restoration and fuels reduction in the next decade, we're going to have to develop markets and think about manufacturing and value-added opportunities in workforce and infrastructure to be able to utilize the byproducts of that work. That's going to be essential for our success. So a lot of you might be familiar with the infrastructure bill that was recently passed. There was billions of dollars that were included in there for forest restoration and wildfire risk reduction activities. Central Oregon was just named one of those designated landscapes and is going to receive $41 million over the next 3 years to do fuels reduction in Central Oregon on the Deschutes National Forest. So in and adjacent to the Bend area and then pushing up, north of there. So a lot of money's coming in. We'll see about 50,000 acres of work done in the next few years just from those funds, in addition to all the other activities that are already going on the Ochoco National Forest and on the Deschutes National Forest and the grasslands. So we're going to be producing a lot more material, a lot of low value residuals, and we're going to be asking ourselves, what do we do with that? Are we going to pile it and burn it, put it up in the air and smoke? Or can we find a way to use that material for a higher and better purpose that meets these renewable energy goals? And that's really why we look at projects like that Prineville one as one worthy of consideration, in addition to a lot of the good work that's being considered in Central Oregon that I know that Megan is going to talk about here in a moment. So that's what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions for you at the end here, but we look at this on a project by project basis, but we see a lot of excitement and a lot of opportunity with what's going on in Central Oregon. And we believe that these projects and the partners involved have a strong kind of identity and focus and approach to what they're trying to do here that we believe can achieve some really critical conservation and forest health objectives in the region, while obviously helping Central Oregon meet its renewable energy and climate goals as well. So thanks a bunch for your time. I appreciate it.
Great. Can I use this clicker? Is that going to work for me? Great. Okay, well, thanks everybody for inviting me, Environmental Center inviting me to participate in this conversation. Really happy to be here in person and really preceded by some good conversations, good topics that have already been covered as it pertains to biomass. So I think the perspective that I have to offer this conversation is just a little bit broader about the different types of wood energy projects that are options in landscapes like Central Oregon. And kind of a bigger picture about how you might approach different types of wood energy systems. So I'll start with a little bit about Wisewood Energy and myself. I'm the Director of Business Development and Vice President for Wisewood Energy. We're based in Portland. We work all over the West, and we develop wood energy systems. That's what we specialize in. So we focus on woody biomass systems for both heat only and combined heat and power systems. And our mission is really to outfit communities with state-of-the-art systems that have kind of a triple bottom line, a benefit to communities. And we really think of it that way, as outfitting communities. Really, what are the local resources that are available in these different communities that we work in, and how can we make that fit the energy needs that they have? And we get pretty obsessed with getting the technology right. So our tagline is technology in service of community and the environment. We really want to make sure we're selecting the right equipment to serve those needs that the community has. And the background pictures are some of the projects that we've engineered and that we've helped to construct. So we've been around for over 10 years, and this is what we do. So again, from that broader perspective, I want to talk a little bit about why folks come to wood energy in the first place. And it's a little bit different than other renewable energy resources. I think when folks think about solar or wind, the driving reason for folks looking for those different resources are really about renewable energy. They want to invest in different types of renewable energy. But most folks, when they come to wood energy as an option, is driven primarily by that forest landscape, forest health motivation that Eric and Joshua and Dylan have already talked about. And I think of three main factors that's related to that for the folks that we work with that want to consider wood energy as an option. And one is that we've got a lot more people in the wildland urban interface, or the WUI, and kind of all around Central Oregon, we see that happening. More and more people living in those forested landscapes, where what is happening in those landscapes really affect a lot more people, whether it's disease, increasing disease, or certainly wildfire. We see this not only in Oregon, but all over the West, where there's more increasing severity of fire and larger acreage of forests that are burning up and having a more intense impact on those landscapes. It's affecting more people. So Dylan just spoke about some of the policies that are happening. Some of the funding that's coming to Central Oregon is one example where there's more and more consensus that we really need to do something about the state of these forests to mitigate this risk of high severity fire. So more communities, more people living in the wildland urban interface being subject to impacts like wildfire. And then the other kind of third piece of why folks would consider wood energy, it's a little bit different from other renewable energy options, is around energy resilience. And this is something that's affecting California a little bit more than Oregon. But it's not to say that it won't come here, and we have some indications that we might start to see some of what has been happening in California. A lot of public safety power shutoffs in our neighbor to the south, where utilities are trying to get ahead of wildfire risks by actually shutting off the power. And obviously that creates a lot of ripple effects and is a real concern for communities that are more subject to those kinds of outages. As I said, that's not something that's really been hitting Oregon yet, but we know that Pacific Power has talked about that in the last couple of years as an option that they're considering. So it's something that is certainly in the back of folks' minds up here, and something that's top of mind for some of the other communities that we end up working with that are interested in wood energy. So biomass energy is unique among other renewable sources because it's part of this larger landscape perspective, where it's really not just about a renewable energy source, but about having an impact, a positive impact on the forested landscapes that our communities are situated in. And so that's really what drives us and drives a lot of the folks that we work with, Prineville and Central Oregon being a prime example of this, where there's consensus and increasing consensus that we need to be doing this work in the woods. This is generating a lot of material that is otherwise being piled and burned, and instead can be used as a productive resource in a controlled environment to generate energy and offset fossil fuels, and also offset some of the pylon burning that's contributing to poor air quality in this region. So we really think of wood energy as being part of a restoration economy for these landscapes. So a little bit more, again, on kind of the background of wood energy, because a lot of the folks that we talk with aren't necessarily familiar with the different types of technologies and the different ways that you can use biomass. So kind of one of the key initial pieces is that you can generate just heat or electricity. And often if you're trying to make electricity, as has already been mentioned, you really want to try to use the heat as well if you can. So combined heat and power is kind of there in the middle of that Venn diagram. And Wisewood Energy, we really focused on heat only for a while, the first part of the projects that we worked on, because that's where the technology was really commercially available. But over the last decade or so, there's some really good wood energy technologies that generate electricity as well. Generally speaking, and this is when we get more into this question of scale and different scales of technologies, generating electricity from biomass is a little bit harder on a smaller scale, but makes a lot more sense the bigger that you get. So, but you can really use wood energy productively at many different scales. So on the top arch there, we've got heating options, and on the bottom, we've got power options where you could also generate heat if you can use it. So at the very small scale, single building, space heating, a building like this, even of course a home, you can use wood energy and generate heat. District heating, a little bit bigger, where you've got a central boiler system and you're heating multiple buildings, maybe a campus, university, or a downtown core area. And then a little bit bigger than that, you can use that heat productively as steam and do things like sanitizing or food drying and more of a process. You can get a bigger scale there. On the electricity side, back on the small scale, you can do net metered CHP, where you're just offsetting the electricity of a single building, usually a single building, but sometimes a campus if it's all on the same property. Or you can export power, and there's really no ceiling in terms of the scale of exporting power. This is the Prineville project, is sending electricity to the grid, and you can be pretty big with that, and then you can be small as well. So there's these scales of systems that are all opportunities for modern wood energy technologies. And just to dig into that a little bit more and give you some more examples of what that really looks like and how that might be applicable to Central Oregon. On the small scale for heat, you could have a pellet boiler. This is a boiler in a containerized system in Northport, Washington. It's in really far north part of the state. It's very cold, pretty rural. They don't have natural gas, and it's a small pellet boiler that offsets all the heat for that school. A little bit bigger. This is a rendering from Mount Bachelor Ski Resort. Wisewood's working with Mount Bachelor. They've been looking at this for quite a number of years and are hopefully securing some financing to construct a system that will use wood chips and will offset the heat for the 5 or so buildings at the base camp. So that's kind of a medium scale use of wood energy, similar to a district energy system.
No electricity for the chairs? No
electricity. Reason being that we have very cheap electricity in Oregon. So at this scale, it wouldn't really make sense to generate electricity from Mount Bachelor. And then a little bit bigger again on the process heat side. This is a dual feed pellet mill that's in Hines, that we designed and helped install a couple years ago. It generates wood pellets as well as pelletized alfalfa, and it uses wood chips in a boiler system to heat that system. So it's a fully integrated wood energy facility. And then on the CHP and power system, on the small scale, you can have 125 kilowatt units that can be containerized and serve in a net metering capacity. Bigger than a house would need, but great for more of a municipality or government building, perhaps a school, and a system that can be scaled up as needed to meet that demand. A little bit bigger, you could have a 1 megawatt power plant. This is a system in Scotland. It's actually the same technology, but just scaled up. So there's 8 of those units. And this is a really nice system that can be, that's a smaller scale and can be more distributed in more communities, has different kinds of demands than a 20 or 24 megawatt system, but it's still can still export that power to the grid. And then again, on that larger scale, you can go up to a facility that is providing electricity to a whole city, and even heat. It's very common in European countries, this is Stockholm, to have a facility that is sending heat to a very large swath of the city while also providing electricity. So that can be over a couple hundred megawatts in size. So the Prineville facility is kind of in that medium scale between the 1 megawatt and a couple hundred megawatts. This matters thinking about scale. We find that it does scale really impacts some key factors in developing these systems. It impacts your source of sustainable supply and understanding whether you can really get the fuel source that you need in a sustainable basis year by year. Larger facilities, just for reference, something like Mount Bachelor is going to use less than 1,000 tons a year. And a 1 megawatt facility would use more like 10,000 tons a year. So really different scales in terms of the wood supply that they need. Permitting is going to be tougher for a larger system. If it's small, the emissions are quite small, quite negligible, and it can be pretty simple to go through permitting versus a longer process and more hurdles if you're a larger facility. Financing can really go both ways. There's certainly economies of scale when you're larger. On the other hand, the total CapEx is smaller on a smaller facility. A key one that can sometimes get overlooked, but there's actually quite a bit of peer-reviewed literature around the importance of social acceptance when it comes to these facilities. So kind of every other factor can influence that social acceptance, but there can be a lot of pushback to some facilities, and scale tends to be tangled up in that, where a community will just really fight a project if they're not okay with how big it is. Generally, smaller scale systems have less of that kind of pushback. And then all these factors also influence how quickly you can actually deploy it. Is it going to get hung up in permitting and community discussion for years and years, or is it going to be able to roll through pretty quickly and get implemented? So those are just different factors where scale can come in, and there's different trade-offs depending on what scale makes sense for a given community. We like to focus more on the small, medium scale, and we think it complements some of those larger scale facilities that Eric's talking about. And primarily because we see an opportunity for these systems basically in every rural community across the West, where you've got energy loads. Sometimes you have access to natural gas, sometimes you don't. Higher electricity costs in some places, unreliable grid, and communities where there's a growing need for defensible space activities and fire safe fuel reduction treatments with material that needs to go somewhere. So these smaller scale systems can be really adaptable and be plugged in most communities in these landscapes as just another tool in the toolkit for what to do with this material that is being generated while having those additional benefits of energy generation. And finally, some of the questions that we ask when we look at different projects and we help communities understand where viable projects might be, whether biomass makes sense there, because it doesn't make sense in every community, include what's the scale of the local underutilized wood source, what type of wood fuel is consistently available. So what kind of scale of a system would work here? What scale is acceptable by the communities, your key stakeholders that are either going to get behind your project and help you make it happen, or are going to really push back and give you a lot of trouble. Where, especially in the net metering side or the heating side, where are your largest energy loads? And those are going to be the best candidates for wood energy. How reliable is your grid? Is electricity something that would be really valuable because you're subject to a lot of outages? Where is new construction happening? That's always going to be an easier, more financeable system if you've got new construction and you can just build it up front. we always rely on local entrepreneurs and project champions to help something really go forward. These systems take a lot of work up front. And so there's got to be somebody locally who really wants to see it happen. And then finally, certainly understanding what funding sources might exist and if there's any incentives for these systems. These are generally higher cost facilities. And so any kind of incentives that recognize these co-benefits are really important to get them over the finish line. I think that's everything that I've got.
Good job.
Thanks.
We're going to jump into some Q&A. I have a few questions. We'll jump into some Q&A. We have a few questions that have come in from the virtual audience, so I think I'll get started with one of those, and then we can also open up for all the folks here in the room as well. Okay, so one of our questions for Eric or Megan, or I guess anybody in general here, say I'm a city or county and looking into biomass cogen for my community. What's the first step I take? If feasibility, what kind of funds are there to support this work?
So from the city's point of view, Energy Trust is really good to work with early on. Their money for the smaller stuff's pretty readily available. So for the city of Prineville, we've actually worked with both Megan and Dylan. So back in 2018, 2019, Megan and her team, we got an Energy Trust grant. We matched it with some other dollars, and we did a small combined heat power system where we looked at providing power to the hospital and the schools around there. And we ended up not going that way, but it was a great look, you know, probably took 6 months to look into that. That would be a really good program for a growing city where you could, maybe you're not modifying an 80-year-old school, you know, but that was great. And then we also used some Energy Trust funds and some wood innovation funds from the US Forest Service. And we were able to match those. So $250,000 from the Forest Service, $150,000 from Energy Trust to do this big design report to get us really to where we're at today. So call Energy Trust, call Megan, call Dylan, and yeah, they'll put you in the right direction.
Yeah, I would just add, Eric totally nailed it with the Forest Service and the ETO. Joshua's program are great resources. If you're in the Pacific Power or PGE territory, Forest Service has funding to look at these kinds of projects. And yeah, in terms of where do you start in a community, as I mentioned, we like to look at where your biggest energy loads are. So it's there's kind of two different pathways. One is the pathway of power export, which is the Prineville project, and it has sort of a different pathway and what you would consider to see whether that would be viable for a community. And then the other pathway is looking at what kind of net metering options would be. And that's more of the, okay, where's your largest energy loads? Are there clusters of buildings that could be connected on a district system? Where are your highest cost energy loads, that sort of thing. So there's a kind of a process that we could go through to try to identify where the best candidates might be.
Thank you both. Do you want to take a question from anybody here in the room? Debbie?
Thank you for all that information. Speakers, I've learned a lot. I don't know about biomass coming into this, so it's been pretty last hour. I really appreciate your point about how innovation is never perfect, and we kind of go for the most information we have right now, and there is some inherent risk, but that's part of it. I really appreciate all you've already addressed a lot of concerns, but I am curious, what are some of the kind of concerns that still stand there, or some of the possible?
Yeah, so there was a question, just kind of building on that piece that Eric wrapped up with around innovation. Are there any risks or concerns as we move forward with these types of projects? I feel like I summarized it. Okay. All right.
Yeah, so the biggest concern or the biggest opportunity is education. And so fundamentally, there are people that are concerned about burning something to generate power, you know, because we're burning natural gas, we're burning oil, we're burning wood. And so if you're maybe one of the large data centers that we're trying to educate on this, nobody's throwing a rock at them for putting up a solar field, but a solar field doesn't have all of the ancillary benefits. There are people that are still quite concerned about, burning wood to generate power. And there has been some missteps along the way. I don't know if you were here when we chatted about, what happened in Europe. Europe created, biomass was renewable, and we just started clear cut in North Carolina. That's a bad deal, but that leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. So we're just trying to educate people on that and just fundamentally understand that we have the ancillary benefits, but something's going to happen with that material. It's just not going to burn. And if we can take care of that in a controlled environment, there's a lot of benefits to that, to our watershed, to our air quality. So that's really where we're at from the city of Prineville, is just trying to educate as many people as we can.
I guess building on that question, we had another question saying one of the biggest concerns with biomass from the conservation community is regarding the source material. So for it to be truly sustainable, there needs to be a guarantee that the material doesn't come from clear cuts or any kind of mature old growth trees. So suggestions that it generally comes from small diameter trees and brush are nice, but they don't provide solid assurances and trust. Are there any specific guarantees in place regarding where the materials are sourced from?
Yeah, so that's where, we'd really like to work, with the public, with the city of Bend, with whomever, because this power can look different. What do we want this power to look like? Right now, we've set up these private wood contracts, and as I mentioned, we're doing that so that we know that wood's going to be here. That wood would be going to a landfill. We're going to pull that out. I think there's a lot of benefits to that. That wood's coming from private land, timber restoration projects. But that wood can come from wherever we want it to come from. And my thought in Central Oregon is we have to do something with water. I mean, City of Bend, your water table's dropping right now. Nobody wants to talk about that, but it's dropping. It's happening in Bend and Prineville. Luckily, with that project, we're going in a different direction. But for a price point, we could treat juniper. We could utilize juniper to fund this. And I think it's really about just voting with your pocketbook. Where do we want our power to come from? We're never going to go and log 21-inch material for this. That just fundamentally, the economics don't work on that. And it's, where do you want your material to come from? What do you want it to look like? So as far as a guarantee, buy some power from me and I'll guarantee it.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, that would be great, Megan.
Yeah, the question about what kind of guarantees there can be, it's pretty hard to guarantee. We're kind of in that process in some of the projects that we're working on in California, where it's actually supply chain question of how do you, if something is Forest Stewardship Council certified, you've got some kind of third-party certification. The supply chain is a really big part of that. Is how do you track, this is following our agreements, our parameters every step of the way before it got to where we are now. It's pretty complicated and difficult to do that on a forest landscape scale where you're sourcing material from a lot of different types of projects, which is not to say it's impossible, but practically speaking, that's a pretty difficult thing to do. And the other piece that I think is bigger is something that Eric just spoke to, and it's the education side of it, the story about what wood energy is in the West. The question referenced harvesting whole trees, and how do we ensure that that's not what's happening here? And part of it's a struggle for that we have in the wood energy industry in the West, that we have to fight against perspectives on a national level that's generated at the national level around wood energy that is different from what we do here. It's totally different context, totally different wood fuel completely different, forest management. And a lot of it is about the Southeast United States in plantations and pellet plants that are going to Europe. And that's a completely different conversation. And it's not what wood energy looks like in the West. And I personally think we've really failed because we haven't told the story of what it is here, which is a story about wildfire. It's a story about forest health and communities that live in a forested landscape that need to do something with this material that is getting burned up already. And that is not the story that is told or really understood on the national level. So it gets kind of just lost. And so the core of the question is just not really, it's just not the case here where we're not harvesting whole trees for energy. We never would. Energy is a commodity here, and it's a byproduct of other activities that are happening. So the more important piece of that question, I think, is just kind of understanding the context that we have here, and that it's really different than what most people think of when they think of wood energy. And that's a big part of our challenge, is to communicate that to people.
See, Dylan's got his hand up, and I bet he can do a great job answering that.
And I'll just kind of to tag on to that, and Megan makes an excellent point there. You know, it's really, really critical that we talk about the regional differences, and the Pacific Northwest is very, very different than what we've seen in the Southeast US, right? And, you know, we have a longstanding history of that. What I'd add to this, and again, you know, I go back to this is about letting the environmental need and the scientific prescriptions drive the utilization, right? For us, it's not about the facility and saying, I want to create a biomass facility. It's what do I do as far as disposal and utilization of this material, and how can I leverage and support the forest restoration and the landscape restoration activities that need to happen. Biomass for us is about being able to do all that work that doesn't get done. Forest management will occur. Logging, industrial logging will occur. Those markets drive those needs, and they drive, you know, those activities. But for all of that low value, that thinning, that those activities related to fuels reduction and to forest health and wildfire resiliency, there is no other market or use for those byproducts. And too frequently what we see happen is investments occur just on the high value timber production activities, and all that good service work and all the good conservation benefits is left behind because we can't afford to do it, because we don't have a market for these products, because we don't have any way to utilize or to dispose of that material. And it makes it a lot harder for us to complete the job when we talk about forest health, because we can go through, but what happens then is you have a lot of piles and you have incomplete jobs. And so thinking about biomass utilization, whether for manufacturing or for energy, this is about good comprehensive forest health and completing the job where it's otherwise not going to get done.
All right, thank you, Dylan. Okay, I want to be cognizant that we are now over time. I have one more question that I'll pull up here that came in as well, relating to the cost of the project and looking at the typical wholesale rate of energy in the West. Oftentimes, some of the biomass projects that we're looking at could be 3 to 4 times the typical wholesale rate. So how would we justify that rate to ratepayers? I don't know if that all falls on you to answer, because some of that is also depending on how the Green Tariff project program is implemented, but I'll let you.
Yeah, that's what we have to, you know, educate people and drive that cost down. We have, as a society, we had subsidized solar, we had subsidized wind. Right now, for instance, there is the investment tax credit, which could be worth 30% of this project. So, you know, a little city like the city of Prineville, we don't really need a tax credit, but this is proposed that if an organization doesn't have that tax liability, they'll actually write you a check for 30% of the project cost. And that's hung up in the Ways and Means. You know, that's one of the reasons why we need to get back to DC and push on that. But things like that drive the costs down. You know, there's just so many different options. If we build this facility, do we look at this facility as a profit center, or do we look at it, the ancillary benefits of it? You know, from the city of Prineville, we got this tidal wave of tax revenue coming our way, so we're not too worried about profit, but we're more worried about forest health. We're more worried about those jobs. We're worried about, just changing the direction that we're heading with our natural resource. And so those are ways to drive the costs down. And then before you know it, you're getting pretty close to, other renewable energy sources. But at the end of the day, do we really compare biomass to solar? Solar's great, but when the sun's down, you guys are getting coal power. That's just what it is, so biomass has those ancillary benefits, and hopefully people will vote with their pocketbook.
Eric, can I jump in?
Sure.
So I think,
Do you want to come up here, Steve, and then we'll also be able to hear you all? Yeah, you're just a little closer.
okay, so right here, okay. So I think one of the things to keep in mind on the value proposition of what we're talking about, back to Eric's point, is it a profit center, is it a cost center, is it activity based? How do we want to value that? But at the end of the day, we're convinced that the ancillary benefits that have been brought forward here today, that's the value proposition for this project. If we can get some administrative money or a little bit of profit that goes back to the county and the city to sponsor this, certainly the people that we're going to have to hire to operate it, that all makes sense. We are talking about significantly higher than the run rate for the avoided costs, what the IOUs, go for when they replace electricity. So, if solar is 3 or 4 cents, that's our competition. We're going to be significantly higher than probably by twice, maybe 3 times. But the other thing to keep in mind is if you look at the Central Oregon Bubble, which is what the utilities call the umbrella of all the power that's consumed, the limit that we have in capacity is 1,145 megawatts. The actual demand at peak is around that 700. So we're talking about 25 megawatts, 3%. If we look at the data center community in Prineville, their nameplate is now approaching 600 megawatts. So do the math on that. So that's maybe 5%, 6%. So for example, if we had our cost of 10 cents, that represented 10% and 90% of the actual market rate. We do a schedule. What's the schedule?
272.
272. The impact to a homeowner, the impact to a commercial business on their power bill is not going to be overwhelming in our opinion. And the value again is we're mitigating for water demand, we're increasing air quality. What's it mean to the city of Bend to have a more robust August tourism season for the hotels, the restaurants, and the other venues that we have in this beautiful community? So I think just keep that in mind, that we're not overwhelming the system in terms of price or patrons, the homeowners, and businesses with this project. And I don't see that ever happen. There's not enough biomass out there that would dominate the base load costs that we need to pass on to customers.
I think we got to look at it holistically. I mentioned just in Crook County, $10 million going out there to cut juniper. So that's just money going out there to cut it and let it lay. If we create a market for that just $10 million going out doesn't happen anymore. Look at what the state of Oregon has coming up with just the fire management issue. I've heard upwards of like $1 trillion in liability over the next 10 years. And so, solar is not fixing that. This starts us moving in that direction. And so yes, that cost, if you just look at that cost, is more. But look at, as a society, all of that other money that we're throwing out there that we could potentially benefit. And I go back to, that little wastewater project. That was tough. We fought and fought and fought. We finally got EPA on board. They gave us a big Pisces award, went back to DC. That was awesome. But now, honestly, Redmond is doing this with about 10% of the effort that we had to put in. Sisters will be doing this. Other communities will be doing that. And it's going to get easier as we go through this and educate the public. And so, it's going to be tax rebates. It's going to be just as a society valuing those benefits.
And I think this kind of comes back to the conversation, looking at how we implement a renewable energy program in Deschutes County or with the city of Bend, and how what kind of goals we set for the Green Tariff program. And so as a community, we can decide that we want 30% of the energy to be locally sourced and the rest to come from renewable energy credits from cheaper energy elsewhere. Or the scale can move in a lot of different directions. So we could take on energy that is a little bit more expensive and have it evened out by, for lack of better words, by cheaper, lower cost energy from other places. And it'll be up to the community to figure out what mix of energy do we want to have and how do we want to prioritize that? Do we want there to be community benefits? Do we see the benefit in biomass, or do we see the benefit in some other source of energy? And so I think as a community, we still have a lot left to figure out how do we want to get this energy and where do we want it to come from? And once we set some of those goals, Pacific Power will actually be able to start to show us what the tariff rate would look like. So what it'll cost Pacific Power customers in the city of Bend to purchase the green tariff rate.
And I would guess, and this is an educated guess, but if we look at House Bill 2021, that's all the residential customers, and it's all customers under 30 kilowatts. So, it's your industrial, your commercial, but the smaller people. But I would guess for the city of Bend, that's probably going to be over 200 megawatts. Do you know that number off the top of your head?
I was looking at those numbers before. Do you happen to remember, Neil? I know that.
So it's probably going to be 200, 220, and we're talking 25 megawatts here. So you definitely don't want to buy all of that power biomass. That would be expensive, but just sprinkle a little in and say you're helping to support this pilot project, I guess I would say.
I think that's a good point, that nobody's suggesting that biomass, that all of our energy should come from biomass. That just doesn't make sense. But having some, well-designed, well-cited systems makes a lot of sense that can have these co-benefits. So I think that's something important to keep in mind.
I think Dylan always does a good job explaining that. It's, at the end of the day, guys, we're not burning this stuff to make power, right? We're burning this stuff to improve the environment, and that's why it's working.
Well, does anybody have any other closing comments in the room or online before we wrap up?
We have contracts in the back of the truck. We can sign you guys up.
Always be closing, Eric. Nicely done.
One quick question.
Yes.
I know you mentioned some of the current uses, so what's happening with that kind of forest product that's not currently being used as biomass? Do you have a quick breakdown of what currently happens to how much of it gets burned versus used for other products?
It's probably 99% gets burned. A little bit of juniper, people will go get it for the firewood, but the majority, if you have a ranch trying to clear 1,000 acres, that's all just being burned right now, or it's being left. And when it's left, it decomposes, which isn't the best.
Yeah, in terms of what's happening on the Forest Service, there are the folks who are working in the woods. They try to bring back everything that they can that is valuable and that has a market, and so they'll take out post and poles if there's something that you can make lumber out of it. That's business as usual, is to do that currently, and there's still a bunch of residual that is just not merchantable. So there's some amount that's merchantable. We wouldn't take that anyways because we wouldn't be able to compete with it. So we're just always taking the stuff that there's no market for now. It's either being burned. In most cases, it's being burned.
The guts and the feathers.
Yeah. Or sitting in piles and scheduled to be burned, but it's going to be burned in 5 years, and so you have large slash piles in the woods drying.
Dylan, did you have a closing thought? I heard somebody chime in there for a second.
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. We'll have a recording of this that we'll be able to share as well. And there were still quite a few questions that we couldn't get to tonight. So I will be following up with some of our panelists to see if they can help answer those, and we'll send them out in the follow-up email. So if you were registered tonight, you'll get all of those resources afterwards. So I appreciate all of your time and engaging in this conversation, and we have a lot more work to do to figure this out. So we'll probably be seeing all of you a lot more.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody, for your interest in this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan.